Good morning, everyone, and thank you for coming.
Morning.
The first order of business will be the approval of our July 26, 2018 minutes. I'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The next item on the agenda, if you recall, last meeting, we wanted to get some insight as to how the expanded city council, how it will affect budget considerations, since we're moving, our decision is moving us out a few years. And we have with us today Darlene Wiles from the city auditor's office, who hopefully has all of the answers that we could possibly have to all of the questions we could possibly have.
I hope so. Good morning. My name is Darlene Wiles. I am the deputy auditor. Megan Kilgore, our city auditor, sends her apologies for not being able to be here today. She had a previous engagement. Just a reminder as to the duties of the city auditor. The city auditor is the chief accounting officer for the city and keeps the detailed accounting records for the city. One of the main responsibilities of the city auditor is to estimate the revenues in the general fund, basically saying how much city council and the mayor can spend. And the mayor and city council, as you know, says what they will spend the money on. So auditor, how much, mayor and council, what for. You have some slides in front of you. This first slide is the revenue estimate for 2018. And if you look at this estimate, you'll see that a significant portion of our revenue is related to income tax. 78.1% of all the city's general fund revenues are from income tax. Also on this summary is, you'll see that we have $47 million estimated for property taxes. That's the 3.14 mills that the City of Columbus residents pay on their real properties. Also shared revenue, which is mostly the local government funds. So that's funds that funnel through the state to the city. And those are basically the result of the CAT tax that the state collects, which is the commercial activity tax. Charges to other funds, there's a number on this estimate for $30 million. That's related to the services that the general fund provides to other funds within the city that are that are business type funds, such as the water utilities, the sewer utilities, those type of those funds that would benefit from our legal services, the city attorney's office, our accounting services, the finance services of the city. They use all those services, and we charge them a pro rata fee of 4.5% for those services each year. Fines are the fines related to parking fines. There are also court costs and those type of costs that are related to the municipal courts. And then EMS fees, another significant revenue source, which is the fees that the medics would be charging when when they go out and do a run. And the fire department will go out and do a run to somebody's house. There's an insurance charge that goes through on that, and that number is $16 million. The other resources that we have here are just miscellaneous other refunds that we might receive, or also license fees, charges that our police may have for alarm charges and those kinds of things, and that makes up about $48 million. You also see in this estimate from last year that, or for this year, for 2018, that we have $16.784 million that was a transfer from another fund. The majority of that transfer was a refund from the Bureau of Workers' Comp. We got about $12 million last year from the Bureau of Workers' Comp as a refund on our premiums. You'll hear about their, billion-dollar back plan where they're refunding to governments premiums that were, basically they're saying it's the result of their good investments. So we did get $12 million back last year. And then the prior year encumbrance cancellations, those are just encumbrances that we roll from one year to the next, and then we don't use them. So that frees up that money to be used in 2018. The estimated prior year fund balance would be the cash balance at the end of the year. That's estimated when the auditor prepares this estimate. So at the time, the ending cash balance was estimated at $14.2 million. It actually ended up being around $17 million. So we did have about $894 million in our estimate that was provided to the mayor and city council that they could use to appropriate in 2018.
Darlene, where are the casino funds captured?
The casino funds, I have that later on in the presentation. They are in the shared revenue number, so that $26 million includes about $6.6 million in casino revenues. So just to demonstrate, the significant portion that we have of income tax that is covering our costs of the city, 78.1%. Now that number has continued to increase since 2008 when we did increase the income tax rate from 2% to 2.5%. And during that time also, since 2008, the state has really cut out a lot of the money that they've been forwarding on to municipalities. So we have lost a lot of shared revenue, and you'll see that later in some schedules that I have. So income tax revenue, as you can see, has been increasing year over year since 2010. The city of Columbus was actually the third city in the United States to have a municipal income tax, which started in 1948. And Columbus has only had 5 negative growth years, meaning there's only been 5 years since 1948 where we've had, compared to the prior year, we've had less revenue, less income tax revenue than the prior year. And 3 of those years have been since 2002. So it's been a tough, 10, 15 years with income tax revenue. Collections in 2017 were actually $875.9 million. 75% of that goes into the general fund, and then another 25% goes into a debt service fund that we use to fund our capital programs. So you can see in 2017, we had $656.9 million in income tax. This year's number is projected to be $662. This graph is just demonstrating, you can see those 3 negative years since 2002. 2008, 2009 were definitely our recession years. The significant increase that you see at the 23.84% was the year that we increased the rate from 2% to 2.5%. So that's why there's a significant jump that year. We talked about property tax revenue. We had about, I think it was $47 million estimated. And you can see that this personal property tax chart shows you personal property tax would be included in the property tax number. However, as you can see, this was phased out beginning in 2012. Again, this is an item that the state cut out of the businesses having to pay taxes on their inventory. So that that number used to be about $5 million pretty consistently, and it was cut out in 2012. Real property tax collections are really based on the assessed valuation of our real properties at the 3.14 mills, and those tend to fluctuate when we have reevaluations, which occur every 3 years. There's a triennial update, and then there's every 6 years there's an update as well. So you'll see that there'll be a little bit of a jump when we have one of those reevaluation years where the county goes out and reassesses your property values. This is the shared revenues we were talking about. If you look at these numbers, in 2010, we were getting just about $50 million. And that number has been significantly cut. If you look going through to 2012, the local government fund was cut almost in half. And then in 2012, the state legislature eliminated the estate tax, which was also coming to the city. So we're no longer receiving the estate tax. And over time, the estate tax was, a good $10 million a year on average that we're no longer receiving. The local government fund continues to be funded at only about half of what it was in 2010. This year, we're expecting about $19.1 million.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the,
$19.1 million in this year
oh, I'm
is
sorry.
what we're expecting.
And that's declining. Is that
It-
a trend, or is this?
It's the state. So the state really has been encouraging the municipalities to use any authority they have to raise their own revenue, and they're cutting back on what they're actually giving to the municipalities, and that's happening.
But is it a scheduled reduction over?
They have just reduced it in the 2-year budget. They just keep reducing it and reducing it. So it's not something that we expect to get back. When they started cutting that back in 2012, the administration actually made a conscious decision to start really cutting costs. That's when they started eliminating some of the, the pickup on the pension plan, and started charging more for insurance benefits to our employees. So there was some cost-cutting items that were put into place as a result of these cuts that the state was making to our revenue. This chart demonstrates the, am I behind one here? The local government fund, you can see back in 2001, we were actually getting $50 million, and that number started to decline in 2012, and then it has just really, continued to decline over the last eight years. This chart is just showing the state tax. You can see that we, pretty consistently we could count on $10 million a year, and then it was just eliminated in 2012. So, no revenue coming from that any longer. You asked about the casino revenues earlier. We do collect about $10.8 million in casino revenues. Part of that is going to fund the Franklin County Convention Facility Authority, $3 million. And then we also have some outstanding debt that we are paying against related to the West Side Community Fund. I talked a little bit about pro rata earlier. This is the charge that we charge to the business type funds within the city for services like the city attorney's office and the city auditor's office and finance, those kind of fleet, those kind of things. So you'll see that we're charging, we're expecting to get about $30 million in pro rata this year. Fines, again, are the parking fines and court costs. That's been pretty consistent. That's a revenue source we can pretty much count on. The fees are set by city council. And EMS fees, since those have been put in place, and we started to get a consistent revenue flow beginning in about 2009, and you can see we're now up to about $16 million a year on that. Council has recognized the need to protect ourselves from volatility in our revenue sources. So they have been funding the Economic Stabilization Fund or the Rainy Day Fund. There was a commitment made in 2009 when we actually used some of that Rainy Day Fund that we would build that fund back up. So the council said that, they passed a resolution that said by 2014 we'll have $50 million, By 2018, we'll have $75 million, and we do have $75 million in there right now. And then by 2020, they plan to have $80 million. So this is for cases where there's a, significant revenue drop that's not expected, or some kind of funding that needs to happen for some unanticipated expenditure. There's really no standard that we've set. The rainy day fund doesn't have to be a certain percentage of the general fund or anything like that, and it can be used at however council chooses to use it. Guess I could catch my slides up here. So income tax revenue, I've mentioned that 78% of our general fund revenues, and that percentage has actually grown from, it's about 62% in 2009. So, and you could see, if you looked at how much revenue we got in income tax each year, you'd see that it just kept creeping up all the way up to 78.1%. And that breaks down from our taxpayer types, basically withholdings on individual taxpayers. So the withholdings that an employer does on their employees that's sent to the city is about 81.8% of that revenue. Individual returns, we get about 5.3%, and then business returns is about 12.9%. So that's how the 78% of our revenue breaks down as far as taxpayer types. We have had a lot of changes in the income tax laws over the last couple years. House Bill 5 and House Bill 49 have caused some changes that we haven't really fleshed out all the results of those yet. A lot of those went into effect this year, so we're still working through some of that. Through July 31st, our income tax growth is only 0.91%, and that's the gross income tax collections. On a net basis, so net of refunds, the growth is only 0.13%. And you'll see that in Mr. Dorian's estimate that he prepared last October. He had really estimated a 2.75% increase over the 2017 estimate, which really calculates to a 1.87% increase over the actuals from 2017. So really, the estimate that we're working with right now, the revenue estimate, would expect a 1.87% increase in our income tax revenue, and we're only getting 0.13% right now. Just to put it in perspective, 1% is about $7 million. So right now, we're falling short of our revenue estimate. And there's some factors that are playing into that, these House bills changes that I spoke about. And I have them summarized on the next slide. And you can see that, especially in the area of business revenue, income tax revenue, the state provided businesses an opportunity to pay their business net profit tax to the state instead of to the municipalities. So if they opt into this program to pay to the state, they file all their tax returns with the state, they send their money to the state, and then the state sends that money on to the city. What that causes for us is we don't have access to audit returns, so we can't look at businesses' returns and then go out and ask them questions about their returns. The state has taken that on. It also causes a delay in us receiving revenue. So it could be 60 or 90-day delay in us getting revenue from the state. About 500 of our businesses have opted into this program, so they're paying through the state. And so far, it's been like a collection, a monthly collection would represent about $750,000. So that's just money that's delayed coming to us.
But it's delayed.
It's
not reduced, it's delayed.
Right, not reduced but delayed, but as you can expect at the end of the year. So if we've, typically, we'd be collecting 12 months of revenue. If we're delayed 2 months,
Okay.
the November and December, it's going to be pushed to next year. Now, next year will be fine, but this year could be an issue.
Are there any surcharges?
They also
at the
charge
state
us
level?
0.5% to do that service for us, which we don't really see it as a service because we'd like to be auditing some of those companies. We don't think that they're going to be taking the same care that we would take in auditing some of the businesses. In addition to the opt-in program, there was also some differences in how cities handled net operating losses of businesses. The city of Columbus did not allow a carry forward of net operating losses, and the state, with House Bill 5, said that we must. So that goes into effect this year. So net operating loss carry forwards can be used this year for city income taxes. House Bill 49 addressed something called a throwback rule, which is basically that if you have a company who's selling goods from Columbus and they're shipping them somewhere else, the throwback was the tax was applied in the city where they were shipped from. So if we had, I don't know, limited, they were shipping stuff out to customers through a distribution or online service or whatever, those taxes were applied in Columbus. Now they've canceled the throwback rule, so the taxes are applied to where the item is shipped. So any businesses that we have that were doing that kind of activity, we're going to be losing the revenue on those sales. I think I talked about the decreased scrutiny at the state level on those companies that opted in, so we won't have the opportunity to audit those firms. So there's a number of factors that we're analyzing and we keep studying, but because this is a new law and taxpayers are reacting differently to how to address these things, we're seeing a decrease in the revenue. We're hoping that some of these things will catch up and we'll be able to capture some of this revenue later on in the year. But right now, we're running at a very slim increase over the prior year. This last slide is just showing you that we've really been tracking this monthly revenue in the income tax area, and you can see that where increases have trended. In 2017, increases trended around 2 to 3% over the previous year. This year, we're seeing very flat or even negative comparisons to the previous year. So, income tax is something that's very difficult to trend. We feel like there's other things that are going on that we're trying to study now, which, for example, people being paid on 1099s versus being employees. There's a lot of consultants in Columbus, and are those people paying their fair share? Those are the kind of the things that we're going to be looking at from an auditing standpoint, going out and finding out if everybody is really paying their fair share. But we do have a lot of work to do in the area of income tax. That's really all I have for you today. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm new to the deputy auditor position, but I have been with the city for 18 years. So I worked under Mr. Dorian for 17 of those years and have been studying these numbers for a really long time.
Thank you, Darlene.
Yeah.
It's very helpful. Is there any questions that you have?
Thank you.
I have one in particular.
Yep.
I certainly understand the year-to-year forecasting. We're being charged with going out 2 or 3 years.
Right.
What criteria do you use? Well, first of all, would the auditor's office forecast, how far out would you forecast, one? Mm-hmm. And two, what are the criteria that you're using in that forecasting? So,
Yeah, it's very difficult to forecast such volatile types of things that could be changed by the legislature, for example. So when you're looking at shared revenue, those numbers are pretty consistent now. So it's in the general fund, you can, if you looked at the numbers and you anticipate any changes that are going to be coming up with the legislature and what the state's going to do, you can really forecast those numbers out. We don't know that right now. We don't know what additional changes they're going to be. There's going to be a new administration, so it's hard to forecast the shared revenues. The income tax, I think I've explained, is the 78% of our revenue, and that's really the number that we need to study. And you would think that those numbers would continue to increase, continue to, people are moving to Columbus, but there's some other factors that are going on too. For example, our rate is 2.5%. And if you say you work in Reynoldsburg and you live in Columbus, Reynoldsburg rate was, I don't know if it was previously 1.5 or it was 2, but regardless, if their rate was 1.5, Columbus would get the other 1%. Well, now all the suburbs where people may be working and also living in Columbus, so they're working somewhere else, all those suburbs, their rates have caught up with ours. So there's no differential coming to the city. And that's really a hard number to capture too. So, it's really been year to year comparisons. If we're looking at next year, we're saying it's got to be flat because, all these changes that have occurred, we're seeing, flat numbers this year. When we did the tax budget, a tax budget has to be filed with the county in July. When we did the tax budget, we estimated about a 2.25% increase in total for our total revenue for next year. And, that's based on property tax revenue going up a little bit because of the assessed valuations, but really a flat number in income tax. And since that's the biggest number we're looking at, it's really hard to project where that's going to go, where all these changes are happening.
Are there any, are you aware of any other state legislated changes negatively impacting future revenue to the city?
No, I mean, we do have an outstanding litigation going on about the state taking over those those businesses. So there's some outstanding litigation. We don't know where that's gonna land. We think that the state is really pushing to take more of our taxpayers. So they want to collect for us and give us the money, and that really causes a problem with our cash flow and those delayed payments. So there was a push for that during this administration. I don't know where that will go with the next administration. We don't see any changes so far in the local government fund. So those are about $20 million. But it appears that the state is sort of trying to get in the mode of collecting for all municipalities, not just ours.
As a revenue source to the state.
Well, as a revenue source to this, they're saying, we're just going to pass it on to you, but when might that change? We don't know.
So other than cost of living, what other considerations do you give from year to year? In adjusting budgets and things like
Well,
that?
if there were, we have a lot of license fees and charges for services that we're charging citizens, building inspection, those kind of things. Those are all based on whatever fees that council sets. So unless there's an increase planned in some of those, we don't really plan. We plan for those to be somewhat flat.
Okay. I'm trying to get a picture of how the city would begin its forecasting into the future
Right,
and to try to align any decisions that will be made by this commission to revenue forecasts in the future as well. You know, I'm not trying to any further make it any more burdensome upon the revenue. So that's kind of,
right.
in my mind at least, that's kind of how.
Yeah, and I really do think revenues are, they're going to be tight. I mean, I think we're going to be looking at additional cost cutting measures because I don't think that, you know, we're not seeing any huge increases.
Or new
right
sources
now.
of revenue.
Exactly.
All right. Are there any other questions? Thank you
Maybe
very
just
much. We
Just
certainly
one
appreciate it.
comment,
Oh,
maybe.
yes.
You know, prior to seeing the numbers and knowing how much development's going on in this city, coupled with how low unemployment is,
Yep,
you know, I would have
expected increases.
guessed, which is all it would be, that it'd be more than you're saying.
Yep,
And so a concern would be, with things so good right now, what is the concern that it might not stay as good as this in future years?
yeah, exactly, our concern as well. And, you know, we've been studying these income tax numbers, calling around to other cities. Cincinnati is having the same experience. RETA, which is the Regional Income Tax Authority, which collects for about 300 municipalities in Ohio, they've noticed the same trend, especially with business income tax revenue being down. Cleveland had a completely different story, so I don't know what was going on there, but yeah, I mean, you know, we're trying to figure out why is this happening, and you know, everybody is sort of experiencing the same thing. It's not just Columbus.
Okay, that's going to be important to our
Yeah,
thinking here.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, moving next, we're in our public comment period, so are there any members of the public here that would like to address the commission? Okay. Hearing or seeing none. Were you here to offer comment? No, no, okay.
Thank you for the offer. This is my very first time.
Can you come forward? I'm sorry.
I am Peggy Williams, and I serve as secretary on the South Linden Area Commission. So I'm learning that you have these meetings in order for us to be able to hear what's taking place concerning the funds. But I primarily was thinking that I would see city council members here, and it was primarily making a decision or determination on the compensation that we would be giving them for their service. But it's good to see that we have, and I'm thinking you're just regular citizens like me in the community that are listening to what our finance department, for lack of a better word, you know, understanding how they're managing the dollars that I pay my income tax to the city, as to how that's managed across the board, not just on this one item, compensation to city council members. So I don't have any fabulous comments to make. I would like to be able to see the actual, to have the presentation in my hand to take to my area commission, because we do have a finance committee, in order to be able to review what the young lady just presented. And maybe the next time we have another public hearing, we'll be able to comment. But
Well, I think she'd be willing to share with you
Yeah,
the slides that we were operating.
I understand my budget.
Right.
And that's the way I would want to be looking at this, and share with residents, so that we would be able to provide you with more input as to how we want to see those funds. But it's interesting although I don't really understand the whole thing, I had the same question that you had with regards to that income tax, and that concerns me, that the state is taking control of the dollars that the city should actually have, because that's one of the things as we as area commissions, we like to have our own money versus giving it to a fiscal agent, because it looks like the fiscal agent has more control over how our money is spent. So we'll probably be looking at that income tax piece to make it more stable. So thank you.
Well, thank you for coming, and thank you for your interest. So if there's no other member of the public to offer comments, we have a meeting coming up in just a few days, August 20th, 2018, where we'll get back into our deliberative state and try to bring together all the information we've collected and to figure out what our next steps should be. Is there anything else that we need to address today? Ellen, the members of the staff, is pretty much where we are. All right, if there's no further business, I think we can adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.